We've been talking about in this module values, attitudes, personality, and a lot of that all comes back to emotions. And emotions are states that we experience that are characterized by certain physiological reactions, but we think of them as kind of short-term experiences that come and then later pass. And now those things, though, are in some ways affected by dispositions that we think of as personality, that are tendencies that we have to experience emotions in different ways. And they have important consequences for organizational behavior. And I think we all know this, is that some people tend to be optimists, and other people tend to be pessimists. And some people tend to be very easygoing, and other people tend to be very hard driving. And all of these are aspects of emotional dispositions. And they affect how we react to stress. They affect how we interact with other people in the workplace. And ultimately, they affect how we perform many aspects of our job. So let's talk about some of these emotional dispositions. There's three that I'll identify that I think are important. The one we generally think of first is we call negative affectivity, and this is our tendency to experience negative emotions. So this is a person who sometimes is called neurotic. Okay, so neuroticism in that big five model of personality is also sometimes referred to as negative affectivity. And the neurotic person always sees the negative. They experience negative emotions. They think on negative things. Sometimes they do what we call perseverate. They think and think and think about the negative. And again, those people tend to experience stress more often and for longer periods of time. What's interesting, though, is that not all negative affectivity is a bad thing. Sometimes it's good to have a mix of the negative and the positive, because those negative people are oftentimes right. And it may seem cynical, but there's something called depressive realism. And the people who are low in negative affectivity, those optimists, often have unrealistic optimism. And that comes into play, for example, when we're trying to plan a project and think about how long it takes to finish this project. And that's where it's good to bring in that cynical, negative person to point out all the things that could go wrong. And that's why you should extend your timeline for this project, because they can often see very realistically negative things that can go wrong. Now, another type of affectivity is called positive affectivity, and that has to do with how outgoing a person is and how motivated and energized they are. And sometimes in the big five, this is referred to as extroversion. Okay, how socially outgoing you are. And this is also very important, again, to look at this, because it correlates with things like emerging as a leader. It correlates with things like customer service. And again, it's often good to have a mix of people who are high in positive affectivity and people who are low in positive affectivity, because while you need leaders, you also need followers. And so if everybody is high in positive affectivity, you might actually create conflict in a small group. And again, we need to look at the characteristics of the job. If the job demands people to be high in positive affectivity, then we should select people who are high in positive affectivity. Now, there's a third kind of emotional disposition that we're starting to look at called emotional intensity. So it doesn't refer to the kinds of emotions, positive or negative, that you're likely to experience, but how intensely you experience those emotions. And research is really just kind of emerging on this, but we're finding that this is a very useful construct, and that some people tend to experience emotions very intensely. And it has implications for another concept called emotional labor. And your book refers to emotional labor, and it talks about that more and more in the service economy, we have jobs that require us to control our emotions or project certain kinds of emotions. So you've probably been at a retail store or a grocery store where they talk about service with a smile. That's emotional labor. And the intensity with which people experience emotions can certainly affect whether they can monitor and control themselves to express emotions. And what we find is that people expressing emotions that they don't really feel internally results in a high degree of stress. There is an inconsistency between your internal emotional state and your external emotional state. And asking people who have high emotional intensity to do that is often a bad idea. And I'll talk to you later. Bye now.